All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am with Matt, the Pickled Dragon, and I am Dracoya with Avant Art and Scale 75 USA. And today we have a special guest, Johnny Fraser Allen. You may have heard of some of the work that he has done. Johnny, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about it yourself?
Sure. I now work full time in the tabletop gaming world, which is kind of a weird late discovery in life. And I worked for about 17 years in the film industry, and then going home every evening to work on my tabletop terrain. And it took 17 years to realize that I I thought what I'm a tangent king, right? But like at 5 years old, I was shown Labyrinth and Dark Crystal on the same night, and it changed my life. And then within the same year, I'd seen Hook and Jurassic Park, and it's like, so by the time I was 8, I'd made like a promise to myself and my friends that I would work in the film industry and work for Steven Spielberg. But as a kind of a sheltered, like educationally dysfunctional child in New Zealand, the idea of working in Hollywood or America was so far out and terrifying, even though I still held that dream. And at the age of 14, my dad brought home a newspaper with a picture of Ian McKellen in it, who was my favorite actor at the time, because I was nuts about Shakespeare, and he was my favorite Richard III. Anyway, it's like, and I'd really just got into Lord of the Rings and was losing my mind over this book, and we didn't have the internet at home or anything like that. Like, I wasn't aware of the cultural phenomenon of Lord of the Rings. I was just aware that I was the only person that I knew reading it, and it felt like such a personal book just for me. And so I guess my parents, who knew that I had never shut up about Lord of the Rings, and then suddenly Dad brings home a paper saying your favorite actor's playing Gandalf, and I'm reading this article. So I didn't imagine Elijah Wood as Bilbo, Frodo, but that's cool. Ian Holm, I love Ian Holm because I love Fifth Element and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So I was getting excited over this article, and then somewhere in the article they talked about it was getting filmed in New Zealand and the effects were getting done by WETA Workshop. And so suddenly I went from I'm never going to get to Hollywood to Wellington.
Hollywood
That's
is
where Uncle
coming to
Tony
you.
lives. Yeah, and so from the age of 14 till 19, the dream suddenly became really, really real. And every single school subject and everything I did in life wrapped around building this folio to one day get into the film industry. Because in my head, I really thought that designing for movies was the highest end of what I thought I wanted to do, which I now know if there's a word or a sentence or description of what I want to do and what I do, it's world building. And nobody built a world like Tolkien, and nobody can visually deliver a world like Spielberg or whatever. And so all these things were like merging together in one place. And so I got my job there straight out of high school, and spent 2 years working my way up from miniatures into the design room, where I started working on Prince Caspian and Tintin and stuff like that. And I immediately discovered that, like, I got my dream that I'd been working for since 5, but I was really confused. I was like now like 22, and I was getting bored working on a Spielberg movie. And I was like, what is that? Like, is this all there is? Mainly it's because it's Tintin and I'm an Asterix guy, had nothing to do with Spielberg. But Tintin's just mind-numbingly boring to me. I'm like swords and shields, not guns and planes. But anyway, um, and so but I was still getting paid to become a better artist. So I was working 50 hours a week to design stuff, and it was great. Getting hits from Spielberg himself, that was great. But because for 2 years, all of my spare time had been wrapped around going home and building my skills up as a conceptual designer, so Richard would let me work in the design room. I now had all of my evenings and weekends back because I was now getting paid to do that for 50 hours a week, right? And so
Isn't
I,
that
I
nice?
started really building, like raiding the scrap bins of WETA of polystyrene and little chunks of stuff, and started having fun making scenic terrain for Lord of the Rings Middle Earth battle game. And then I just got so into that and so into that. But then now and then I started designing my own world with my free time, which was called the Gloaming. And I can talk a little bit about that in a minute, about where that started from. But anyway, so the point of the story is years and years went by, and every time I got to the point where every time I was making terrain, I'd beat myself up and feel guilty about it. It's like, you terrain isn't a career. That you can't, like, you, I know you love it and you're addicted to it, but it's not a career. This spare
Could
time
be.
should be. Well, I didn't know at the time. This is going back to like
Yeah.
2008, you
No,
know.
it's a different world now, for sure.
Well, yeah, and well, I didn't realize that. I never saw it as an option, and so it's like, Johnny,
Right.
you idiot, stop working on this stuff. Like, spend more time designing monsters and working on the gloaming, because that's the IP that you could make something out of. And so I put gaming, miniature painting, and terrain making aside for like 3 or 4 years. But just put it all in boxes. And then one day we got invited to go see the set of Lake Town for The Hobbit. Um, and I've been working on it for 2 years, 3 years, whatever it was. And
Yeah.
it's it just opened this doorway in me, this gateway. Like, it was walking around a gaming table, everything, and the way I want a gaming table, like Lord of the Rings, like the original trilogy. It's like the sets are amazing, but everything is so straight and geometric because it's made by really fastidious 300-year-old dwarves or 1,000-year-old Art Nouveau elves. Everything's perfect, and
It was
Alan Lee is
beautiful.
such a, it's amazing. And I can't make that stuff. I can't draw a straight line. I'm not interested. I don't want to. But suddenly I walk around this wonky, tilted, sinking town made out of all these different pieces. It's all like, none of it was CG. Most of that trilogy was, but Lake Town wasn't. Every time I
Hmm.
find myself wanting to rewatch The Hobbit, I really just want to watch the Lake Town scenes. And I'm walking around the set going, I have to make that. I have to make that. So, oh, but Johnny, you're not a terrain maker. You can't make terrain. And then, but after that, I thought, well, just treat yourself, mate. And so I started getting back into terrain. And then even years after that, um, what I think I wrangled myself the job on the Labyrinth board game to do the art and the miniatures for it. And by the time I started doing that, it's like, you know, I just I just designed the BFG for Spielberg, and nobody cared. Spielberg didn't care. No one I worked with cared, and it wasn't about. I don't do what I do for caring, but it's just like, it was weird to have, like, tell 8-year-old Johnny that he designed a title character for his god, and there wasn't much in it for him. Like, that he 8-year-old Johnny would time travel and murder me. But I had to
Yeah.
process that, and I thought, what do I love doing? I just love board games. I and this is where it all came together for me, is that I finally clicked and realized through board gaming, designing for board games or tabletop games, is the absolute height of conceptual design. It's not being one person on a team of people for a massive, but for Peter Jackson, Guillermo del Toro, Steven Spielberg, doesn't matter. Like, that's fun, and that's a great way to work on your art. But for me, the ultimate storytelling, world building, top of the pyramid is when you design for board games or tabletop gaming, because you are making your audience an active participant in an immersive world that you're completely overseeing. Mainly because it doesn't cost me $300 million to get that world to the cinema. Takes
Yeah, that helps.
9 years and like 10,000 people and $300 million for James Cameron to make a forgettable Blue Space Cats movie, right? But I can spend a couple years and a handful of thousands of dollars to create a world I'm obsessed with that other people get into, but also they become a story element in it. And I just, even though Labyrinth wasn't the game I wanted it to be, it was the kind of fish slap in the face that made me think, oh, I'm a gamer. I've had my film experience, and I just completely gave myself over to it. Started my own company and released Hagglethorn Hollow, which was a surprise success for me. Which and again, everything is about filtering my experiences into what I'm best at, what I can provide people with the best within my limited means, and what I enjoy the most. And it all just boiled down to where I'm at now with Matt Rauscher, which is turning the Gloaming, which I'll talk about later, began as an art project, which is my most visually rich and massive world building asset that I've created, and having Matt Rusher and Matt Barker help me develop that into an immersive world where people can really be part of the story and that story's outcomes. Yeah, so that was me trying to do a brief.
It sounds like you finally figured out what you want to do for the rest of your life, like what you want to be when you grow up, the thing that makes you the happiest.
Yeah, I know, and I didn't know. I kind of knew it was this, but I didn't know this was an option. It's like it's a weird, like, it's nothing the guidance counselor could tell you, because technically what I want to do for a career, like I just want to do exactly what I want to do all day long and get paid for it. But it coincides that what I want to do all day long is build worlds.
Right.
And there's no clear defined path of how you can do that easily or successfully or in any kind of financially viable way. Like I've turned down more well-paying jobs than I can count to just break even on creative projects, because that's where my heart's at. And sometimes when things get tight, a part of me goes, "Oh, you idiot!" But also, that's only coming from a financial point of view. From a creative point of view, I'm always, I don't regret anything, and I'm going from job to job, and the work I turned down would have been vaguely creative, but really just a paycheck.
Yeah, not really where your heart is at. And at the end of the day, I think that chasing happiness is more important.
I think so, and I think, like, but the game keeps changing, and it's hard, like it's harder and harder to make a living at what I'm doing in some cases. But at the same time, like if I get to 40, which is soon, and I've accomplished most of my goals and I made it work on my terms, then that's fine. But it's worked out so far. But it just yeah, I kind of feel like I age 3 years for every one that I work. But
Yeah,
I
when you
wouldn't
own
do
your
it.
own company, that sounds about right. I know how that feels.
Right? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the one thing I really learned on the Gloaming is, after working on it for 8 years and then I assembled the exhibition, because it's like 40 or 50 creatures that are life-sized. I mean, one of them's a 15-foot dragon,
Oh,
um,
geez.
I have one small desk at WETA Workshop. There's a picture of me talking to Stephen Fry, and like half of the Gloaming is just stacked around the shelves, but the other half is just in different corners of the workshop, because I had no place to store it. I was living in a flat. And when I finally got it all together in one room and all the artwork on the walls, and I walked in, I couldn't believe that I'd actually done that much work. And I just remember telling myself, it's like, you spent 8 years, like the only reason it got done was from beating myself up in total stress, right?
Yeah.
Like kind of Warhammer flagnet. But I don't know if
Yeah.
that's ever the way you pronounce the word, but those guys from Terry Gilliam's Jabberwockies that are whipping themselves, that's how I got the Gloaming done.
Yeah.
Yeah, without the Catholic side of it. But I looked at what I was doing and I was like, oh shit, I wish, like, I was going to get this done no matter what. That part of that is just making ADHD or potentially being on the spectrum work for me, as opposed to the other way around. But like, I got it. I was going to get it done no matter what. I wish I'd let myself enjoy it more, because it
Enjoy
took a
the
lot out of me
process.
and cost me a fortune. I wish if I'd gone back in time, I was like, if you're gonna do it, I wish I'd let myself enjoy the process of sculpting and designing more. But at the same time, and then I try to remember that every time I get really stressed out on a project, which is every single project.
That you're going to finish it. It's all going to be okay. It's all
Mm.
going to come out just fine in the end. So just relax and enjoy it. I know, but
But
maybe that's just one of the negatives of being a creative mind. You're a little more eccentric and you're always pushing yourself. You have bills to pay. You're grown up.
well, exactly. I think, like, yeah, it's like the two devil. If I had two things on my shoulder, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is like the devil one is like Jeffrey Combs as Milton Dammers from The Frighteners. Like, throw it in, Garrett. He's the intense one that has to get things done, right? And the other one's like Jeff Bridges, Jeff Lebowski. Just chill out, man. Don't worry about
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
I never listen to Lebowski. I always go with Milton Dammers. But
Yeah.
I think if I start listening to Lebowski, I won't be working. So I was like, Johnny, just enjoy it. Like, yeah, man, let's just relax. I'm like, you know what? You're right. And Milton's going, what are you doing?
I know. How do you
I
relax when you have so much on your plate?
So yeah, what we are going to want to do is also we'll share a few clips from we have the video of your exhibition where you
cool.
build the Gloaming, and we're going to share a little bit of that.
Johnny tapped me on the shoulder years ago in the airport in Wellington and said, I'd love to work at WETA. And that started the most incredible friendship that's gone on for nearly a decade now, I guess. And about 6 years ago, Johnny came and saw me and said, is there any way I could get some help to realise this incredible dream that I've got in my head? And that has turned into this incredible exhibition, this book in the making, the publishing that is coming along so beautifully, and all the intrigue and excitement that is unfolding around the Gloaming.
What Johnny has done is pure creation. And I think that the last time I saw something that even remotely resembled this was the last time I watched Labyrinth. And I have been waiting for that to come back again ever since. You know, I think that when you look at the great artists, the halls of the great artists, it takes a certain kind of arrogance to become a Dali or a Spielberg or a Jim Henson. And Johnny's cocky attitude about his own vision and his own ability and what he's going to do in the world, I believe he's going to be in the halls of the greats. He has a dream and a vision and the talent to get him there, and that is so inspiring to be around. He puts his whole heart, his whole mind, his whole soul into his art. It's his food, it's his breath, it's his satisfaction. Johnny has sacrificed 8 years, really, of his life to creating those pages.
Tirelessly every day, coming in at the same time as the rest of the crew, but rather than going to his desk and working on commercial work, he went to the desk in the corner and chipped away at what's in this building today. But to think that it's come out of the hands of one individual with some small assistance from his colleagues and friends at the workshop is a truly mind-boggling achievement. And then to know that there's a depth of creativity, story, and amazing entertainment underneath this body of work is truly tribute to the amazing person that stands beside me.
So I hope that all of you, I really sincerely hope that you not just buy, but treasure the Gloaming, because all the while he's had you in mind, he's had his readers in mind. He's been thinking all of this time of your imaginations and of how to make them fly.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, do you have some favorite piece in this project that you have worked on?
Yeah, I think I've got two favorite pieces, and they're kind of the same piece in a sense. Like there's the troll wagon, which is a big hill troll dragging a wagon that's really, really rustic. My favorite story about that is when we're working on The Hobbit. Oh no, just quickly, the second piece is a much bigger interior shot I did of the dwarven troubadour grinding his organ, but he's inside the wagon, which is a diorama I built much bigger than the actual troll wagon itself, so I could capture, same way kind of like Leica or Nightmare Before Christmas or whatever.
Yes.
The city is sort of a miniature, but when you go inside Jack Skellington's house, they've built a big set for it, sort of thing. Like the different scales, you can't film inside Jack Skellington's house as you see it when he stands outside it, sort of thing. Whatever it took to get, the Gloaming was always about hand sculpted visual imagery that had nothing to do with CG. It was I've always rallied against it. there's been so many times in my life where I would be a very well-paid conceptual designer in the film industry if I'd ever leant into doing stuff in ZBrush, but it never grabbed me, and I kept following my heart. I want to get my fingers dirty and push clay around, much
It's
to the
a completely
detriment of my
different
finances.
style.
But yeah, I just think you arrive at better decisions. And like for me, the reason why Labyrinth and Nightmare Before Christmas and The Dark Crystal and Box Trolls are my favorite movies is because every single frame is the handwork of artisans. And I honestly, like, you know, movies like Avatar or insert Marvel movie here, whatever they are, like, I know there's thousands of people pushing pixels, and more power to them, and I'm glad they're paying their mortgages, but I don't personally consider it artistry. I consider it like an understanding of a tool. You know what I mean? It's
well, no, I would argue that that's why some movies have aged better than others, because of the lack of CGI. They leaned more into, you know, your natural effects, as opposed to a bunch of CGI and pixelated things that, you know, 10, 20 years from now, it looks really bad. I mean, I remember seeing the very first Harry Potter movie, and the troll was so scary and so good. And now I watched it a couple years ago, and I'm like, wow, what is this?
Yeah, I know. At least with the Harry Potter movie, though, like, so much of that stuff is in camera. And then, you know, like, could you have done Buckbeak as well if he wasn't CG? Like, I totally get it, how it services stuff, but it's funny, like, you know, you listen to George Lucas on commentary. I got enough. I got no beef with George. How can, like, he's gifted creatives so much, you know what I mean? Like, he's changed my life. Like Return of the Jedi as a kid, I do what I do because of that movie, you know. But it's like, he talks about, you know, I couldn't get my imagination back then, and now I can, and I do this, and it's like, and then you compare what he wants it to look like versus what it did look like when you compare the original versus the special editions, and it's like, it was unwatchable. It's like, thank God you had those restraints, you know.
Yeah.
And somewhere in the back of my head, it's like, the only positive thing that ever came out of Jim Henson's early demise is that we never got to see a what if. Like, he was already leaning down the 3D path with some of the stuff he was doing with Disney, and it's like, we never got to see him make a bad movie that dated really quickly. Everything he ever did is a legacy work of utter genius, you know. But and that actually goes back to the Gloaming. For me, the impossible thesis I set myself with the Gloaming is, I want to make the third film in the, not linked narratively, but in the trilogy of Dark Crystal, Labyrinth. Oh, we never got another one because he caught pneumonia on the set of Ninja Turtles in 1990. You know what I mean? Like, what if? And so, like, that's literally the highest peak of the mountain I could aim for. And I'm not saying I achieved it, but that was the brief I set myself. And I couldn't even sculpt when I started the Gloaming. So for me, it was like, because I'd got to WETA straight out of high school, all of my friends had like 30 or 60 grand loans for a job they were yet to get. And I'd got my dream job. I hadn't bypassed university in the sense that I spent the last several years of my high school education making my own brief, failing all the classes because I was so into, but my folio did what I wanted it to do, right? And but I'm thinking, like, if I one day I just thought, if I had 30 or 60 grand loan, what would I do with it? What would I wished I'd spent it on? And so I just created the Gloaming as my thesis. And it also came about because there was this pocket of like 6 months when King Kong, I was making miniatures and life-size dinosaur bones and all this kind of stuff for King Kong for 2 years, and then you know, everyone at WETA gets their white letter, which is, you know, we're waiting between projects, and that's the only way WETA can survive. It just can't hemorrhage money by paying people to sit around, you know. And and so I just said to Richard, it's like, well, rather than leaving, can I just stick around and teach myself how to sculpt? And Richard's always been such an amazing man at embracing the side of me, I guess, that I think he likes that I put my money where my mouth is, and like, I'm there every weekend and I'm there every day. And that's how WETA got formed, because Richard's that kind of guy. I'm nothing like, you know, like Richard is a force of nature, but I think that is a part of me that maybe he sees in himself, and it's like, of course you can rip into it. And so I had a desk in the world's greatest sculpting department that ever existed, maybe since Phil Tippett was making Jabba's band in 1980.
When you were there,
I mean?
did you have a moment that was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm actually here. I can't believe I'm doing this.
Every minute for the first 16 of the 17 years was like that for me.
Yeah, you've had imposter syndrome.
Oh, I still have imposter syndrome. Yeah. I'm just putting my pencil down on a drawing I'm drawing for the latest Kickstarter. It's imposter syndrome. But I mean, my main piece of advice I'd give anyone, because I get asked for advice all the time, is like, never take advice from anyone. But my other piece of advice is like, never wait to be the best, because there's always going to be someone better than you. You know what I mean? I just need to pick up an art book of Alan Lee, John Howe, Tony Dizzolatti. Like, everyone's better than me, but I enjoy what I do, so I just got to keep doing the best at it. I mean, like I was designing trolls for Guillermo del Toro, sat next to Alan Lee and John Howe, you know, and I was maquette when they got, it's in the movie, it's great. You know, when I went to go sculpt them, I'm sculpting them in a room with Jamie Biswarrick and Dave Meng, who are the best creature sculptors that have lived since Phil Tippett. And it's like, you know, I'm not saying I don't suffer from imposter syndrome, but if I let it get to me, I'd be serving chips somewhere. You know, it's.
And that's what I keep telling people. I had a follower who reached out to me the other day, and he said, you know, Dracoya, how do you know when you're good enough for commissions? And I was like, when someone offers to buy your shit.
That's right.
Yeah.
When they
It's
offer
really
you the dollars. Yeah.
Thank you. And he's like, well, no, you don't understand. I don't think I'm good enough. And I said, so freaking what? You're never going to be good enough. There's always going to be somebody that's better than you. That's just life. You don't want to be the best, because how boring would it be to just be born on top?
Yeah.
And if you did get to the best, there's always going to be a new gunslinger that shows up into town anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
So what?
I think the only person I can name that is the best and has been the best for like 40 years is maybe Spielberg as a director. But even then, I'm not sure when his last E.T. was. But he's never made a bad film, at least, and you still look forward to one of his movies. But you know, it's one of those things. It's like, you know, no one's the best forever, I guess. I don't know.
No, yeah, we've always got room to grow.
Maybe we should ask a really good question before for the uninitiated.
Mm-hmm.
Can you describe for them what is the gloaming?
Well, the gloaming is so many things and became so many things. Primarily, I've always been obsessed with medieval mythology and folklore, especially the Eurocentric stuff. I don't just mean Britain, but like, you know, Russian and Scandinavian sort of stuff. I think primarily the driving force behind that was Jim Henson's The Storyteller, which just like, I mean, I remember Dad, back when video stores existed, some of your watchers may have to Google what that is, but Dad would take me to the video store and I'd always pick up, you know, it was 9 episodes broken into 3 VHS tapes of The Storyteller, and I'd always pick one of them. It's like, you got that last week? It's like, yeah. It's like, do you want something else? It's like, it would either be Storyteller, Harry and the Hendersons, or Dark Crystal or something. But it would have to have a creature feature in it to be interested, because and this is related to the gloaming, but you know, growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, I grew up in the absolute zenith of monster creature toys after everything was trying to ape the success of Kenner's Star Wars, and then He-Man, which was trying to ape the success of Kenner's Star Wars, and then Ninja Turtles, which was trying to ape the success of He-Man, and then all the things that formed around those, which saturated the market, from Thundercats to Toxic Crusader, whatever. There were all these lines that every 2 weeks, this toy company had to release the next creature of the week, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of it was driven by these cartoons that were just to sell the toys. But I mean, I'm 5, 6, 7. I don't know that stuff, and so my whole life revolved around which next figure I can get. Every birthday was about getting. But so my whole childhood was holding physical monsters. And one of the main reasons I make terrain now as a living is because, like, you might at best you could get maybe 4 or 5 characters for a birthday, or you could get a play set. But with a couple bricks and some cardboard, I could make a shitty play set, but I could never make 6 characters. And so a lot of my childhood was making these play sets, but they weren't very good because I was 5 with the kid scissors or whatever. I wasn't able to do much. And so now what I do through Tabletop Troubadour or printable scenery is make the play sets that I was trying to make when I was a kid that I can't make now. I mean, sorry, that I can make now because I've had like 2 decades in the film industry as a designer and a maker. And like it just took most of my life for my abilities to catch up with what I was trying to do when I was a kid, and so which is what's really exciting about the Gloaming, going back to that, is because even for almost like the 15-16 years I've been working on the Gloaming, I've been able to focus on the characters, but the larger world around the Gloaming has been out of my means to create. Like the way I describe it is like I've created the Fellowship, but how boring would Lord of the Rings be if they didn't go through Moria or Minas Tirith or the Shire? Like the biggest character in Middle-earth is Middle-earth, and so this Kickstarter has allowed me to do, and what Matt Rauscher and I are fleshing out at the moment is the Middle-earth to go with the Riders of Rohan are cool, but like, do they just live on their horses? Where do they live? And so this is Edoras. Wow, that what I mean? That's the Edoras is 50% of the reason why the Riders of Rohan are exciting. The Shire is 80% of the reason why hobbits are interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I'm able to give the characters I spent so long designing. And when I say I had the means to design these characters, it's like every cent I earned in the film industry and every waking moment I had, I put towards teaching myself, which goes back to that thesis part of it, where the Gloaming comes from, is that so that's what I was saying. That time between King Kong, where I had some time off, Richard let me use the sculpting room, and I thought, I'm going to teach myself how to sculpt. I'm sitting next to Greg Tozer and Jamie Biswarwick and Dave Ming and Ben Hawker and Bill Hunt and all the people that sculpted the creatures in Lord of the Rings are now like my friends and acquaintances, and nobody's gatekeeping. They're the most generous. Oh, you got to use, like, most of my tools I still use. Jamie Biswarwick handmade for me 20 years ago. Like, so you want to use this, mate? Like, really? And it's like getting given the Elder Wand, like.
Yeah, I know exactly that feeling.
Unlocking a better weapon in Zelda, but my sculpting goes up 25% with every tool he gives me because I wasn't doing it right before. Well, I guess I'll give it a try. Whoa, fuck, this is amazing, and so that was the kind of. So I was already in the University of Creature Sculpting, and I wasn't paying fees, right? So I took the fees I should have been paying and put that towards the main cost of the Gloaming, outside of just rent and feeding myself, which I lived in a crappy place and ate poorly to pay for the Gloaming, but that was still part of the bill. But then it was silicon and molding cost and the labor for my friends to mold and cast that stuff, which is a huge expense, but it's not going to get done otherwise. So that's what I started doing. And so with this time off, I thought, well, how am I going to teach myself how to sculpt? Because I started sculpting a goblin, but at any point when I'm making up a goblin, it's like, that's a goblin. It's like, yep, I guess it is. So I thought, I'm going to replicate Hoggle from Labyrinth, because he's the character and creature that stole my heart and made me obsessed with creature features, right? And he's always kind of like been in the back of my head, and like it just really affected me as a 5-year-old. When he was like, should you need us for any reason at all? I'm like, I do need you, Hoggle. Sometimes for no reason at all. Like, I always needed him, and it always stuck with me. So I made a life-size Hoggle, and I had so much fun doing that. I thought, Alf and Ralph, the one of us tells the truth, the other one always lays. Oh, what it lay! So I realized, well, all 4 of those heads is the same head sculpt, and so just as a thrifty budget, and they're also my secondary favorite character in that movie. So I thought, if I sculpt 1 head and 1 hand, I can get 10 hands and 4 heads, and I'll make the rest in polystyrene. Of course, that cost me thousands of dollars and like 6 months of my life, just that idea. But again, by the end of this time, I'd sculpted these. Alf and Ralph came out perfect. Hoggle, I'd like to redo, but it was good enough. You can see him in the current tested video, just perving on in the background, just standing there. But like half the comments in the video is like, was that Hoggle? But I made these things and I was like, wow, okay, I did it. I taught myself how to sculpt, and the guy that did all the leather work for Narnia, Mike Grealish, who did the saddles and the fawn's armor, he's the guy that taught me how to make Hoggle shoes and his leather jacket. And you know, I was learning from it, and the paint department, the guys that, you know, are painting Gandalf's nose and Frodo's toenails, they're all teaching me how to paint this stuff. And so okay, great, that was a great project. And then, but I looked at it and I was like, I'm really happy with these, but if I'd spent all of that time and money creating my own content, I'd be halfway towards an IP by now, which of course wasn't the case, because Gloaming has now 40 characters and not 3 in it. But anyway, and so I thought, and I'd really got the bug for sculpting and everything, and so I thought, and that's when the Gloaming started. I was like, I'm going to do my own thing. And that kind of idea came around the same time that I was at a bookshop and I picked up Tony DeSillity's Field Guide to Spiderwick. And I looked, it's great. There's these books called the Spiderwick Chronicles, and they're quite good books. And then they made a movie of it, which isn't a great movie only because they cut out, budgetary wise, they cut out a lot of the things that Tony injected into that world that had made it so special. Because I guess they could, we picked up the IP for this thing that has 50 creatures in it. We can afford to do 5 creatures, you know, like it just takes away the point. Well, don't do that movie then. Anyway, but
yeah, do something different.
It's a cohesive movie and it's well acted and it looks great, but it's if you loved what Tony did with that world, it feels a bit empty, you know. It's like doing Dark Crystal with just the Gelflings or something. What's the point?
Yeah, that's not enough.
Yeah, right. And so but I looked at this book and this masterpiece that he'd created, which is like a field guide, and he's watercolored all these creatures. And so originally I thought, well, that's a good, originally that was the task and premise I set for myself. It's like I've always wanted to do my version of medieval folklore creatures since watching The Storyteller as a kid. But if I hand sculpted them and actually photographed them real, like Spiderwick has the watercolors, but what if I'd make this book that's actually like someone's photographed them? Like, it was going to take a lot more work, and I didn't really have a story attached. It was just a loose premise, for, you know, because I could sculpt a goblin and I might try sculpt a troll, and at the end of the day they're just folio pieces. But in my head I thought, if I can wrap that around a project, one, it's going to keep pushing me to do more creatures. But all of those creatures aren't just like, art is never a waste of time or money. But if I can make all that time and money go towards a project that I could potentially do something with, take it to a publisher or do an exhibition, then that got me excited more. Anything, use the whip, use the carrot, use both. Anything you can do to keep yourself, you know,
motivated and focused, which is very hard sometimes.
Yeah, I've never had a problem losing the muse. But I feel for people that do. I mean, I wish I could dial it back a bit sometimes, but it gets me in trouble. But so I make a bunch of these creatures, and then it's funny, like there's so many different parts, because the Gloaming's been going on for so many years. It's taken so many tangents that have gone this way, but then all come back. You know, it's like streams going to the ocean. But so I'd worked on making all these creatures for about 2 years, and then I ended up for a spell getting back together with a high school sweetheart who is a writer, and she actually won the Man Booker Prize for her book The Luminaries recently. She's a big writer. Anyway, but I had no confidence in writing, but I really started to feel a story happening around these characters. And she goes, do you want me to help you with that? And I, in my head, naively thought this a great writer helping me write the Gloaming would just be like, take my ideas and make them incredibly legible. Just, you know, let me put my story through your J.K. Rowling filter. But it became one of those things where, like when Peter decided he didn't want to direct The Hobbit because the first 3 films had exhausted him and didn't want to go through that again, which I can completely understand. So, well, who's going to direct this then? Well, who's the second biggest fantasy director name out there? Because you're not just going to give it to anyone, right? So they find that guy and they give it to Guillermo del Toro. But Guillermo del Toro is where he is in life, not because he's a yes man or a puppet. is because he's an absolute burning, fiery visionary, right? And so
Mhm.
they didn't put that into account. So suddenly, like, and for the 2 years I worked on Guillermo's film, it was so different to the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was a completely different world, really, but it was just this utter vision, and you can see both sides of that. Like Guillermo's like, I have to, it's going to be great, man, you know. And Peter's going, Guillermo, it doesn't actually look anything like the Fellowship. It's like, no, but it'd be better. It's like, well, it's not about being better. Anyway, so they kind of came to heads there, and then
Yeah.
that kind of pooped its pants and disappeared, and then Peter had to pick it up and do his version of it. But no one's really at fault in that situation. But it was kind of this thing where, like, she took it in this complete. She was really interested in the reign of King Charles II and stuff. But what happened is it started moving the Gloaming into a really human world, where the creatures were kind of entities that kind of popped up but weren't the main story.
Mhm.
And um and for me it's like when Luke walks into the cantina in Star Wars and the camera pans past, it's like, hey, I like Mark Hamill plenty, but like, why isn't Hammerhead the main character in this movie? It's like, who's that guy? What does he do? What does his kitchen look like? You know, it's like everyone else in the cantina is so much more interesting than anything else in the Star Wars trilogy to me, because I'm obsessed with creature features and stuff. And it's like, I see humans every day. I go home to humans. Like,
Yeah.
I want to see an Ithorian as Han Solo, you know. And what's that weird white fluffy thing with like a nipple for a mouth? Why isn't he Princess Leia? You know, like, that's the movies I want to watch. And so for me, the Gloaming was kind of like a reverse ET. It was like, what if Elliot got lost on ET's planet? You know, like I wanted this. It's I've seen enough
I can
movies where
see that.
humans are the central characters, and then the creature features play a side role to the human story. And that, I'm not saying I found that boring, but I just wanted the Gloaming to be just drop you into this world. And so, you know, and so it got to this point where it's like, look, she's like, oh, I need to figure out the story. Why don't you work on a different project for a while? I'm like, what does this become? And again, totally see her point. That's her process to make the best story.
Right.
And like, history has shown that she's one of the world's best writers. She knew what she was doing at the time. But for me, it wasn't the story I wanted to read. And so I started this project making masks. I'll do an exhibition of masks. So I made all these different masks, like of clay and bark and rock and earth and all these. And I was really having a great time. And then eventually, you know, life intervened and we went our separate ways. And suddenly I had all of these fantasy creatures. I'm sure her Gloaming was going to be amazing, but it wasn't my Gloaming. And so then I had all these masks and these fantasy creatures, and something, and a bunch of little elements. But because they were all done in my style with my cohesive conceptual ideas behind them, they kind of married really well together. And the masks, which kind of became masks of power, started feeding into a really interesting and really viable story arc and element into this world of creatures I'd made. And because of a weird trajectory timeout situation I'd had that didn't work out, suddenly I was in a place where, like, I wouldn't have got to otherwise. And I realized what the Gloaming was. And even though I didn't have the confidence as a writer, I just, in the same way that I taught myself to sculpt, I just started teaching myself to write, because you've got to start somewhere. And I don't know how many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hours of writing I did, and how much stuff I've thrown away as my skills develop. Like, there may be like 40, 50 sculpts in the Gloaming, but there's 30 sculpts, 40 sculpts that are in the bin, or I gave away to people without even photographing them, because they weren't they were a discovery process.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so this thesis thing started growing into a story, and then it became an exhibition. And I think when Richard, years prior, said, yeah, you can use the workshop, that you rip into it, mate, I think he was imagining that I was going to do 2 or 3 characters, and then like 50 characters later, he kind of realizes that I've made this entire world, this entire IP. And so what happened at WETA is, Richard always really, really believed in the Gloaming and loved it. And, you know, we get, you know, any day at WETA, like you'll turn around and Tom Cruise is there, or Prince Charles, or George R.R. Martin. One day it was Ron Muick, who is an amazing Australian artist, but he also sculpted, performed, and voiced Ludo in Labyrinth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you just get like your idols are just walking past. I'm not saying Tom Cruise is an idol, but he was one of the nicest men I've ever met in my life. And so you just, and Richard, you know, because my desk was always full of creatures that no one had to sign an NDA to look at. You know, it wasn't part of James Cameron's Avatar 4 or Neil Blomkamp's District 9 or whatever was happening. It was just a desk full of, Johnny, talk about this. Oh, okay. Hi, Tom. And it's like, oh, Johnny, nice to meet you. This is great. Tell me. You know, it's like, whoa, all right, calm down, Tom. But but like you're generally interested, whatever. Like one time I had to set up the exhibition and show Prince Charles, right? And I don't care at all about the royals, but my dad's British, and I knew he's going to dine out on the story of his son talking to Prince Charles. And so we had to go through this, like, we had to go through this meeting of like, you can't call him mate, or he's got to be called Your Majesty. You can't shake his hand or anything. And I just forgot. Like he walks up to me. He's surrounded by like men in black sunglass eye thing, you know. And I go, oh, g'day, mate. And I just shake, and he shakes my hand, and the guys kind of come forward like this, and I just go, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, so like for 30 minutes, Prince Charles is like, oh, what's this character? Oh, wonderful. And look at this chap. Okay. Yeah. And he's really interested and engaged and asking a really smart question. I think the most bizarre thing that's ever happened to me in my life is Prince Charles, the now King of England. And like for me, when I say King of England, it's like, you know, like I get like King Arthur. And for me, like it's medieval fantasy. Like having met the King of England is
it's kind of a big deal. Not everyone gets to do it.
You know? It'd be a big deal for someone, but for me, it's funny that I talked to the King of England about burgle noses and bodocks and stuff like that. But yeah, he when I was starting explaining that this is all about medieval folklore, he goes, oh wonderful, and tell me, Johnny, does the Gloaming have a burgle nose? And in my head I'm like, well, you've really got to know your countryside medieval British folklore to know what that is. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's the one riding the hedgehog. It's like, oh great, wonderful. And I'm thinking about like the Queen reading him bedtime stories. It's like, how does he know what a burgoynos is? Which nanny is talking about that? And you think of like old Nan talking to Bran about like White Walkers or something. But tell me the one about the brownies, you know. But and so that was really bizarre. But then not as bizarre as when like he leaves after like seeing the Gloaming. He says, oh, what, you must tell me when the book's out, Johnny. I'm like, yeah, I'll give you a text. All right? But how am I gonna let Prince Charles the Gloaming's coming out this year, you know? King Charles. Anyway, the point is, it's like, Richard let me have this space, and then one day he said, we've got to make an exhibition of this, and like you're talking about imposter syndrome. It's like I'm never ready, but it's like, okay, if I lock in so I got a really amazing exhibition space in Wellington, and look, you know, you could have booked that stuff in advance, and they agreed to exhibit my work. And I thought it was going to be a good idea to exhibit it the same week that the world premiere of Hobbit Part 1, An Underwhelming Adventure, hit the cinemas. And so everybody was coming into New Zealand, and lots of media and stuff like that, and it was fantasy related. You know, so I figured it's like, oh, I'll have the Gloaming exhibition then, which locked me into a very specific date, right?
Right.
Which made me panic and finish all this stuff, but I did finish it, and I it could have been years or never to get that stuff done, and I did it, and I stuck it all in one room, and it's like, wow, okay, no matter what happens, the Gloaming at least has had a final ending of an exhibition. It's completed its primary function of making me a better artist, a better world builder, a better conceptual designer, and a better sculptor. I achieved an unfathomable goal that I set for myself. It cost me like a fortune in my 20s, but I did it. And so I was like walking around it going, this is all right. Okay. And you know, Richard and other people were really impressed. And at the time I was I was building an IP for Evangeline Lilly, who's the Wasp woman. She was Elf Lady in Hobbit, and so she was there, and her and Richard gave a speech and stuff, and but it was before I was particularly internet savvy, and I'm not really good at promoting myself online because I'm just interested in the art, and I don't actually. I struggle with that side of my career, but it's actually really important.
I think a lot of artists struggle with that. I've met the most amazing sculptors who do so well for themselves, brilliant artists, and they're just not very well known because they don't know how to advertise themselves very well.
Yeah,
but it is a whole thing.
I think I know, but I feel physically ill when I do it. But that's a Kiwi thing. We're not good at saying, "Hey, look at me," you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel that like Jamie Biswarck, who is, you know, he sculpted Gollum and Grishnak and anything cool in the Lord of the Rings. He's the greatest creature sculptor that ever lived. He's just a really downplayed, shy dude. But you know, like when you see interviews with Phil Tippett, but less grumpy, like he's just this understated dude, you know. And and like, you know, in my 20s, there's the scene in Game of Thrones where like they raid Craster's keep and the horrible guys have tied up Hodor and they're kicking the crap out of him. And I think he's called Rasp. He's something else in the books, but in the show he's called Rasp or something. And he says, "If I were you, I'd be king of the world. No, if I was as big as you, I'd be king of the world," you know? And sometimes with Jamie Biswarck, it's like, man, if I could sculpt like you, I'd be king of the world, you know? But for him, it's just like he can do in 30 minutes what would take me 3 months to wish I could do, sort of thing. And he's just happy to sit at his desk and genius just kind of pours out of him like a faulty tap. But but he's not like I don't think has an online presence at all.
How does it feel now that it's finally out there, your Kickstarter? Like your project is finally done?
Oh yeah, it'll never be done, but the Kickstarter is out there, and the Gloaming's been out there before, but not as a product. Just like Hagglethorn Hollow was the first time people have bought art off me or whatever, but it was the first time it was a product. And I struggled with that a bit because if people I don't ever care if people don't like what I do because I'm only doing it for me, you know. Yeah. And then Hagglethorn Hollow went out and it was really well received and stuff like that, but I was still like, it's not good enough to sell to people, but people who buy it disagree. Do you know what I mean? But I got a couple things in my head that I play back to myself when I struggle with that stuff. It's like, one, Spielberg hates Hook, right? That film is a work of genius. Two, Dark Crystal and Labyrinth were both box office flops, you know? And they're the single greatest works of collective creativity that have ever been filmed. You know what I mean? And it's you know, so it's like, well, it doesn't matter if people like the world's full of people that think Avatar 2 is the greatest movie ever made. It's like, you know, you can't wrap your brain around what people like or don't like, you know. That was a 3-hour movie that took me 5 hours to watch, you know. It was I really struggled to invest in it, but for some people that is the height of creativity. Some people think The Labyrinth is a total joke of a movie.
I thought it was amazing.
No, it is amazing, but the point is, it's like it doesn't matter to me if it's easy to not really be too worried if people aren't into your art, but for someone who'd spent most of his life making his art for him, you do at some point have to get it out there if you want to continue. But the Gloaming has had so many false starts that this is really like so after that exhibition, my ex, who at the time was now a really world famous author, she kindly took me to about 3 world leading publishers in London, and again, the story of the Gloaming wasn't finished, but I had a folio of my art, and all of them barely could look at me, and all of them were saying, well, we'll publish it if she writes it, but we don't want your art in it. And one person got to the point where it was like, maybe you can do some kind of black and white chapter headings. And I was like, and so I listened to that, and yeah, it was really deflating, right? but at the same
Right.
time, they're a business. They want to publish stuff. One person said something that was kind of relevant, which was, if she writes it as a novel, we can sell 50,000 copies. If you make this book the way you want to make it, if we push it, we can maybe sell 5,000 copies. But the thing is, like, what you've set out to do, and this is true, but it's like basically like you're pitching like in terms of a book and how it's published and presented, it's Alan Lee's centenary illustrated edition of Lord of the Rings, right? This isn't Lord of the Rings, and you're not Alan Lee. And that was a really good point. Like, because I had set out to do the book I wanted to read. And
Right.
you know, my favorite book on my bookshelf is like Alan Lee's illustrated Lord of the Rings. So it's like,
Right.
I'll do that, which is ridiculous. It's like, I want to make this look as good as a Jim Henson movie. It's ridiculous. But you aim for that stuff. And I didn't even know how to sculpt when I started, but I knew what I was aiming for. So every time I failed, I knew why I failed, and I knew what I had to keep trying to get to. And that's what got me there in terms of it being a thesis or a project that pushed me as an artist. And so when I finally had ticked these boxes and got everything together, not once did I spend a single second of, is this commercially viable? Do people want this? Or does a publisher want to publish this? And so, you know, for 5, 6, 7, whatever years, I kind of sat on the Gloaming because, like I said, like it had achieved its primary outcome, which was to make me a better artist. And as a folio piece, like there's like I may have helped design the BFG for Spielberg, but I can't really even legally show most of those concept designs, right? But so same with like Narnia or The Hobbit, like the trolls and their backpacks and the environments that I designed for Guillermo del Toro's Hobbit is some of the most creative work I've ever done in my life. I can't show anyone, right? But the Gloaming was always this folio that has opened doors and projects, in the sense that like, there's been projects at WETA where Richard's like, well, Johnny can art direct that. It's right up his alley. And that happened because I got to a level where Richard Taylor could say that of me because he was so familiar with the Gloaming. And so like in terms of artistry, it had served its purpose for me. And I was happy enough with the story and stuff like that, but I'd been informed by 3 top publishers at how hard it was going to, and I didn't want to kind of give the Gloaming away for a handful of dollars for a begrudging publisher. And it wasn't like an FU to anybody. It was just like a, you know, like I said, it's like, well, I hadn't given up on it either, but it was just kind of sat there for maybe for a couple 3 years, and I was trying to figure out what to do with it. And then what happened, and this is where the next big step in the Gloaming came from, is WETA Workshop decided to make a division that was to produce board games, which they launched with GKR, and they spent a lot of time developing GKR. But I was one of the few people at WETA that was actually like a board game nut, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I wasn't involved with it whatsoever. But they hired this one guy, Ike Hammond, to you know, to full-time help them build the campaign and figure out the pros and cons and the successes and failures of Kickstarter, and to help them get the best result they could. And they got one of their absolute best designers, which is Christian Pierce, to design this world of robots, and then Larry Greer, who designed all of the graffiti for District 9, and then because Die Antwoord are friends with Neil Blomkamp, Die Antwoord asked Larry to basically design the look of Die Antwoord and their look and their tattoos and the albums and all that stuff. So they put Christian Pierce and Larry Greer together to make this incredible looking game called Giant Killer Robots, and Ike was there to help best deliver it to the world, right? And the 3 of them were meant to go and like get like a what's that? What do you guys call those camper vans that Walter White cooks meth in?
RV.
Yeah, so they got an RV, and they were going to drive for 10 days around the Vegas area of America, stopping off at every main board game shop on the way to Gen Con. And at the last minute, Christian Pierce didn't want to do it for very understandable reasons. It was just because, you know, he's a bit like Jamie, or like a lot of people at WETA. Like WETA would like to put you out there and you can be Mr. Toad, but we're all really just Mr. Mole, you know. We don't want to.
Yeah.
But so he Mr. Moled out, and they're like, oh well, Johnny, he's just been doing so much stuff on the Labyrinth and Dark Crystal board game. He's personable. Do you want to take that place? And I'm like, not really. But it was also like, if you want to pay me to go to Gen Con and have a trip around America, yeah, I felt a bit false because I knew nothing about GKR. I had no involvement in it, but I was happy to get excited about board games for WETA and go to Gen Con, which for me was, I'd been to a few Comic Cons. The first one was fun, and the second one wasn't for me because ultimately my excitement and passion and drive for movies had really turned into games now. And if you're really excited about movies and pop culture, Gen Con's for you. But if it's not really your thing anymore, it's a nightmare. But Gen Con was an absolute living dream for me. I'm meant to be at the booth going, hey, play GKR. So I'll be back in 10 minutes. And like 2 hours, I'm just going, look at this booth, look at this booth. So I haven't even covered anything. Oh, I know you made that game. Well, you know.
That's how I felt when I went to ReaperCon for the very first time. I had just gotten into miniature painting, and I went to ReaperCon for the very first time, and I was like, if I die, this is where I want to end up. This has to be heaven, otherwise I'm not interested. It was amazing.
I should have seen the writing on the wall like 10 years earlier. You know, we have all these celebrities like that's Sigourney Weaver, you know, that's whatever. But then one day the Perry twins who worked at Games Workshop were walking around because like my hobby budget might be, this month I might be a bit cheeky and buy that $80 box of orcs, right? Peter Jackson's hobby budget is, you know, they don't really make Anzac soldiers. I'll just fly the Perry twins over to New Zealand for 2 months. I'll buy them a house in New Zealand and they can sculpt me my own line of Anzacs. They never get commercially produced, but just for his table, right? So that's what happened.
Yeah.
So the Perrys are hanging around in New Zealand, right? And which is great. Anyway, so when they came around, it's like, oh, there's Sigourney Weaver, there's Tom Cruise, the Perry twins, and they themselves are walking around WETA going, wow, Lord of the Rings, this is amazing, and then they're getting geeked out on, you know, and years later I stayed with them in Nottingham, and they were such, you know, amazing, generous hosts and everything, just really, really cool guys. But you know, so that was Gen Con for me, was just like where the true celebrities and heroes were, and people's booths and everything. And at one point, flying over there, Ike, who's a taller man than me, said, you know, it was just me and him in this company, you know. So he wanted to fly premium economy, so he was better rested. And so, what, $500 extra? I go, I'll stay in economy if the company can give me that $500 to spend at Gen Con. So I'd rather get a bad night's sleep and then arrive at Gen Con with some pocket money, you know, because it was the only shopping
mall. There's so many cool things, so many new toys.
So good, and everyone's booth is so cool. But it's, you know, and it's like the size of New Zealand, and it's awesome. But
Johnny, let's talk about the Kickstarter, shall we?
Sure. Yeah.
So obviously you're working with Matt Barker. I'm doing a little bit of writing for it. I'm going to share the screen up here a little bit so we could display the Gloaming swamps.
I have to say, I completely see your inspiration with the Labyrinth and Dark Crystal in some of your work. When Matt was showing some of these things to me, I have tryptophobia, which means I am a little terrified by a bunch of consecutive holes like fungi, which is funny because I love fungi, but some of your work really freaked me out in a good way. Like, it triggered me in a good way, because that means you did a great job enough for my own brain to be like,
Yeah, I'm drawing a lot of bamboo related stretch goals, and you know, bamboos have concentric rings, and then I'm tying them together in the same place, and so doing lines with rings down them and everything. I find it really cathartic, to be honest. I love, And you know, because a big part of these campaigns, like with the gloaming especially, like I've had a really clear idea of what the gloaming is, but then Matt Barker, you know, who really wants to make sure that his client base, not client, his customer base, and their gaming needs are really met as well. And he's like, well, and he's always wanted to make some cool bamboo stuff. And initially, I'm like, oh, I don't see bamboo in the gloaming. But then I wrap my head around it, and I start drawing my idea of how bamboo would be used in the gloaming. And it's like, why wouldn't bamboo grow in the gloaming? This is how they'd use bamboo in the gloaming. These look great. I'm so glad you told me to put bamboo in the gloaming. You know?
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the collaborative process, and that's what I'm really getting out of working with Matt Rauscher. It's funny because if we'd be doing the exact same thing like 10 years ago, I'd be like, no, it's my vision, whatever. But you sit on the gloaming for a while, and then you realize it's like, well, what's best for this IP? What's best for the product? What's best for the project? And and it's like, well, it's not a book that's on the shelf where people are going to be like, you know, Gimli never wore a helmet. Gimli had a yellow hood. It says here on page 242. Why has Gimli got a helmet in this movie? It's like, as opposed to going, wow, I love what they did with Gimli's helmet. That's a cool take on Gimli. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
one of those is really the better way to go. You know,
I have since joining you guys on these projects, I have been blown away by and we've spent countless hours just talking about the gloaming, designing the world and bringing it all together in a cohesive story to bring to a tabletop game. And the thing that immediately struck me was you already have, like, there is this minutia of story behind every character, behind every every location in the world. And it just, to me that I find that stuff very interesting. The world building is something I always loved about Dungeons and Dragons. And going back to the 80s, I started my personal homebrew world in Dungeons and Dragons. I started the first iteration of it came out of the 1980s, and and it's evolved since then. And for me, it's got, it's a kind of a rich tapestry. But what I experienced since working with you is the gloaming is going to be something really special as things unfold. And this Kickstarter here is just the first tip of the iceberg of this universe that Johnny has really poured his heart and soul into, nearly 20 years in the making, really. And it shows. I think people, especially if they start with this Kickstarter, I'm writing the very first introductory adventure for the gloaming, for the Kickstarter. So not only are you going to end up with a bunch of terrain and miniatures, characters, but you're also going to have that first taste of the world to experience what these characters are all about. And
well, that's been kind of one of the hardest parts in some ways, is that this is probably like 1/18 of the gloaming in a way. These campaigns, this is my fourth or fifth one with Matt Barker with Printable Scenery, but these take a phenomenal amount of investment, both in money and labor and hours. We've got a big team of people. It takes a huge amount of work just to get this, and so we really have to be, we have to be really selective of what, and the gloaming in some ways was a risk, or a tactical risk, in the sense that we could do really straightforward generic castle buildings that everyone can use, but like the gloaming had the potential of throwing people off, in the sense it's like, I've got to know what the gloaming is to play this. It's like, not at all. We just thought the swamps was a really interesting, everybody needs swamps, and we used the gloaming as a way to make the greatest swamp terrain available, and I believe we achieved that. It really is no one's done swamps this well. But there's swamps and the Gloaming, and the Gloaming has really cool characters and plots and themes behind it. So we thought this would be a really good opportunity, because Matt and I have been working for some time. We're developing the Gloaming into various Dungeons and Dragons books and assets, and so we thought, well, let's be brave and introduce it to the world now, and because we've been working on it for so long. And we even thought about just not calling this the Gloaming and stuff like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a word, and we're really excited to get these creatures and these ideas out to the world. And we wrapped in a really amazing, immersive swamp campaign around it. And for me, like, it's everything has been drawn with the Gloaming in mind. And to me, the world of the Gloaming, like, I see it as like an eco-friendly version of the apocalypse, in the sense that, for me, the Gloaming, in terms of kind of like a vibe, it's like the movie Waterworld, or Mad Max Fury Road, or Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Like, it's a dark place, but a nuclear bomb hasn't gone off, right? Like, what I mean is, like, all of these characters, they've got one pair of clothing they're patching up. There's no Kmart or Walmart, whatever you guys have, you know what I mean? Like, it's like every day is like, oh God, I made it through that day. It's like, I got something to eat today. I didn't get stomped on by a dryad or eaten by a nixie today, you know? And it's like Mad Max Fury Road. It's like, what's the lifespan for those people begging for water outside of Morton Joe's place, you know? Like, it's that kind of terrifying vibe. It just happens to be covered in moss. There's plenty of water. Well, there's plenty of trees, but that's not a good thing. There's things in the water. There's things in the trees, you know? So it's that same dark, you know, it's as dark and dangerous as 40K
Eerie.
or the underworld of Coruscant, or whatever, you know. It's Mos Eisley Cantina over a globe, but it just happens to be in a forest, which is somewhere that I'd rather be playing anyway. So so that kind of twisted, like, rooty look, and that kind of like, anything can basically eat you sort of thing. There's all sorts of going on in there, but also, if you like the swamp creatures and can stick them into your campaign, the word Gloaming never has to affect your gameplay. These will become really really worthwhile and really valuable later on when we have a book, or anyone can see these and go, man, I didn't see that as a dryad, but that could be an ant army, or I need something like that in my D&D. They're just assets to benefit your gameplay. It's like, man, those trees are great.
Useful.
It's just really useful. Everything in this is the most useful, cherry-picked things out of the Gloaming that can universally serve you as a DM or a game player, or just as a model maker.
And that's what I was going to say too, is that regardless if you're interested in immersing yourself in the world of the Gloaming, which personally, now that I've had a close-up look at it, I don't know why you wouldn't, but the pieces here, you know, are fantastic. You know, whether you need tree ant models, whether you need swamp terrain, or just really new and original monster figures. This Kickstarter has basically everything. This is a Gloaming Shambler, so it's kind of like a cross between a shambling mound and an earth elemental. You know, and the statistics we're putting together for all of these creatures are.
That's a good one to talk about, Matt, because the shambling mound, like most of the things in the Gloamings are things that you would have seen on my desk 10, 15 years ago. But the shambling mound character there is a direct collab with me and Matt Rauscher, from the work we've been doing building this book and world up. Sometimes he'll suggest something, or like ideas we have kind of leapfrog over each other till they get to a point, and I was like, oh, I have to draw that. And like, so this, because we're working on the D&D supplement material, not only in conjunction with this, but completely adjacent to this as its own project, you know, like weekly meetings, and we're working on it all the time during, around, before and after this Kickstarter. That's all happening. The Shambling Mound was an idea I drew based on collaboration of ideas with Matt Rauscher. It's like, oh, I've got to draw that, and then Matt Barker sees it and goes, we've got to stick that in the campaign. I need that model. I love that model. Oops, I just turned my phone off there. But it's actually Matt Barker calling. He knows I'm on a Zoom. Anyway, so like, and Matt's like, can we stick that in this campaign? It's like, if you want to get one of your modelers to make that, it's from the Gloaming. It fits in the Gloaming, and it fits beautifully into swamps. And he's calling me. So.
Yeah, it's it's been such a pleasure working with you and Matt. It's really been, each part is, each of us are contributing something, and the result is far greater than the sum of the parts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I was worried about that to begin with, because I didn't know Matt Rauscher prior to going into this, and Matt Barker had talked about him over the years. Like, when we do this book, I've got to bring this guy on. And one thing he said is like, Matt's going to get really excited and get his own ideas and take it off in this direction. And at first I'm like, that's not what I want, But that's because like
you just went through that. You don't want to do that.
I just went through that, But like his tangents, Matt's ideas within the Gloaming, for me, something I was worried about has become like, I have a good idea of what the Gloaming is, but it's kind of like, I have a good idea of what Middle Earth is, right? But imagine if I got a ticket to Middle Earth and like Tom Bombadil said, I'll take you for a tour, I'd discover things about Middle Earth I never knew that excite me. And that's kind of like working with Matt. It's like, I'm now getting like a tour around this world that I created and I thought I knew, but I'm like, that's in there too. Wow, that's awesome. It's
I love that.
And I wasn't expecting that. And so, but it's the danger is he pushes you into this like almost lazy mode of this like, I know whatever he's going to write is going to be perfect for this thing. And I keep having, Johnny, you've got to check the Trello every day, and you've got to give feedback, and you've got to keep on top of it. Because at the start I was like, oh yeah, that's quite good. But now it's like anything that gets written, I know is perfect for the Gloaming. But the last couple of weeks have just, obviously when a Kickstarter's on, it's just a couple of months.
But that's the one thing too. I've been really fortunate that we do mesh so well, because one of the things that we talked about at the very beginning was that when we create these creatures, you might recognize some of the names, like Nixie, for example. There's a D&D Nixie out there, but these are Gloaming Nixies, so these are different. And not only is it something that's going to be unexpected from just a naming convention, so your players might hear Nixie and they'll have an image of something, but they're going to be very surprised with the how these creatures react and how they operate in a combat, because one of the first directives was we want to create creatures that are completely unlike anything that are in D&D or other related 5e products. We want them to be surprising and do unexpected things. And I think we've done a pretty good job so far of delivering that. I don't expect that to change anytime soon. I'm really happy how these things are coming out.
Well, that's one of the, being around Richard Taylor so much, and he's a close friend, as well as like a mentor and a benefactor and a boss. He wears a lot of hats in a relationship, but nothing changed from me looking up to him as a teenager to me knowing him now close to 40. I've been listening to Tony Robbins' personal power stuff since I was like a teenager, and he always talks about like, if you admire someone, use them as a success coach, whether they know it or not. And the best thing I think I learned from Richard was, Richard can do everything within the company. He can sculpt, he can draw, he can weld, anything he can do. But rather than just go, no, it's got to be done like this, he's really good at taking it. And he used to drive me home a lot because we both lived in Haitaitai, and he'd share some of his wisdoms with me, But he really taught me how to like take a step back. It's like, we've hired that person to do this, we're not going to tell them how to do their job. And so I went into working with Matt kind of like, I'm not going to say, no, the Gloaming has to be this or this. 10 years ago I would have been. It's like I had such a clear vision of the Gloaming. But luckily, through experience and failings and successes and things I've learned through it, I just went into this with day one going, I've it may never be published, but I've written The Gloaming as a 3-part novel, right? In terms of an exhibition, in terms of a world, I've succeeded in showing the world and the creatures I wanted The Gloaming to be. And so as an exhibition, it's done its thing. As my book as a story, whether someone reads it or not, it's done its thing. But going into this, it's like the primary goal isn't to service Johnny's idea of The Gloaming. The primary goal is to now take The Gloaming as an IP and make it the most workable and playable 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons asset as it can be. And if you keeping that in mind with everything, and that's why you get Matt Rauscher to do it as well, because he just knows everything. He is the book, you know. He is the meat book. He just, you know, he has it all in there, and so you know. And so like he suggests things that I wouldn't have thought of originally, but it's like, but they're going to make it so much more fun to play and so much more interesting, so much more useful for a DM. Well, Matt, what would you say? I guess for me, I would say like designing The Gloaming, like even though it's a magical world as such, I always saw magical or magic as like a filthy word that I avoided. I always wanted it to be based in reality. When I look back on it, basically that's because I really wanted The Gloaming to feel like a world that you could visit. I remember
a world
there's
of possibilities.
Yeah, and magic, like, you know, magic doesn't exist, but
right.
But
so it's a bit limiting when you put magic into the world. I mean, it's wonderful and there's all these possibilities, but it's almost a little limiting to your imagination because it's a little bit far from reality.
Well, I also think like I think for me as a conceptual designer and world builder and storyteller, I've always felt magic closes more doors than it opens, because it's just anything goes. It's like the Harry Potter books are great, but I just hate that she put a time turner in it, because it just throws out everything she's established and anything goes now. It's ridiculous, you know?
Yeah.
And so as a point of reference, anyway, little things like that can throw me out. It's too even though I'm comfortable with wands and broomsticks and potions, a time turner, that's unrealistic, you know? It's that kind of thing, you know? And so Matt and I have been walking that line with the very few ideas I've had to say to Matt. It's like, that's too magical. And so I get that. And so it kind of comes back to when I finally got, this is before the age of DVDs or the internet, and when I finally got Labyrinth on VHS for myself as a commercial copy, it came with the best documentary ever made at the end of it. I don't even know. I watched all the credits because I wanted to learn who'd made my favorite movie. Then all of a sudden this documentary starts, right? And Jim said this one thing in it where he's saying, he basically says that Labyrinth is allegorical and it didn't really happen, and it's kind of in Sarah's head, and it's a metaphorical movie about giving up your childhood self and growing into a young woman, which is a film he made for his daughters. And he's like, but if you want to see it as a real place, you can also. But I'm so what do you call it? I'm so like gospel when it comes to the original creator's vision that I remember feeling so disappointed that Jim didn't see Labyrinth as the place I saw it as, because it really felt like, you know, maybe one day I might get abducted and taken to the Labyrinth, like, because I guess because it's so hand sculpted and everything's in camera under real lighting, nothing's actually fake, even though it's a fake world. Other than the Labyrinth reconfiguring itself, there wasn't much magic in the Labyrinth. And so like, even as a kid, even though I knew Fraggles and Wombles were puppets, I'd still kind of look for them in the garden. Like, there's something about tactile magic. And so I wanted the Gloaming to, just for me, if anyone else, it was important that the Gloaming, that's why everything is based in mythological folklore. I wanted there to be this kind of, whether it's a dimension or a part of the world as yet undiscovered in a Skull Island kind of way, I wanted to feel like all of our folklore and mythology have come from the creatures in the Gloaming that people have seen before through various means and have tried to explain. And now we have the descriptions of them, but this is actually their true genus. And because of that, as a a primary conceptual design clause over what I drew for the Gloaming. There's no metal. Nobody has a belt buckle or a steel sword, because that means that they can mine. And I can't imagine any of the creatures in the Gloaming having a system or a culture or technological advancements strong enough to be able to set up a system where they can mine and process ore. So of course they wouldn't have metal. And so
that's very detailed of you.
Well, once you take out metal, it completely directs your design decisions down. Like I want to build the troll wagon, but there's no nails, and also the wood can't be milled because there's no saws, and so that leads me down this design aesthetic path. That if I could, they've got a mill, they've got nails. I'm just going to make this cool steampunk thing. So why is it steampunk? Where are they getting the steam? How do they know how to process steam? Is that copper? Is that steel? Where are they getting the copper and the steel from? Like once you figure out the world to that kind of depth, so the more I took magic out of the Gloaming, the more real the Gloaming is, the more interesting my decisions were. And for me, D&D and fantasy, it's just so easy, and it's such a quick fix for people to just throw in. It's like, oh, there's a flying ship. How does it fly? It doesn't matter. It looks cool though. It's like that. Because I'm so driven with conceptual design. And so when it came time to like Matt saying, well, I imagine these people have this spell. At first I was a little bit, but then once he really got the Gloaming and knew how to, as long as it's thematic and it works within this book, it's like, I just had to put aside, I didn't want to put this 5th edition monster manual and the campaign we're developing into, I don't want to back it into a corner, and I didn't want to take away the fun or playability from it just because in my 20s, I had a very strong vision of a low-tech, grungy fairy world. And so we've been meeting in the middle of that to make it the most playable game while still staying true to the conceptual vision, I guess, of the place.
And that's really been the challenge, is to keep that magical feel without being too overtly magic. And I've been, I spent a lot of time on a lot of these monsters as we've been developing their statistics, trying to figure out ways of avoiding magic, but making them competitive in a 5e game. Because 5e characters are loaded for bear with magic and all kinds of things to ruin the day of creatures in the Gloaming. But I think we've come up with some pretty creative ways of keeping them on their toes. And
Matt, would you say that constraint I've loosely imposed on you has driven you to more interesting creative decisions?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
So that's the magic of that,
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think that people are going to be very happy when they see the finished product. And of course, this is the first of hopefully many dives into the Gloaming rabbit hole. And I'm very excited for this. It's been such a pleasure working with you. I can't say that enough, because I've published monster manuals in the past and mini adventures in the past, and with the exception of one project, I've always just kind of worked on my own, and there is a certain satisfaction to getting a job done and getting it out there. But I've always been a person who much more prefers to be collaborative. I think it brings out the best work possible when you have everyone kind of pushing one another and stretching their mind and for example, I think last week was a good example where we were talking about creating the statistics for these fellas here, and I had a finished product, and Johnny was like, well, what if we pulled out this spell? What would we do to the entire makeup of it? And then I had to start thinking about, well, if we did that, we're going to have to find a way of making him competitive in a different way. And I think we succeeded in that.
That's the funny thing is, like, I've also got to kind of, pinch myself in the sense that like I'm working in a world where like a magic light shining through the eye holes of a magic mask gave consciousness to a piece of moss that grew up big enough to wear the mask and crawl down the tree and bring life to other creatures, right? But I'm also like, Matt, that character can't turn into mist. That's silly, you know. Not silly, but it's like that's the small step over the line in the sand for me. But it's very hard for me to describe why one thing seems too magical and the other one just fits into the world. But Matt, you know, gets that without needing like a thesis on it, you know. But it's an interesting, like, the thing of creating one small idea developing into quite a big part of something always interests me. Like when I was working on Guillermo's Hobbit, originally I said, it's like, Guillermo, Tom Waits has to be the voice of Smaug, and he's like, but he already had his casting for Smaug, and he's like, I'm like, okay, and then I came back, it's like, Guillermo, Tom Waits has to be the main goblin, and he's like, I love that idea, but I'm going to film the head goblin practically, and so it's going to have to be like some 20-year-old bodybuilder, because he's going to be in a massive bodysuit on set for 3 weeks under studio lights. Tom Waits is like 65. It's not going to happen. I'm like, good point, right? And then I had one last try. I was like, oh, no. And then I gave up, right? But then he comes back to me one day at my desk, and he's like, you know, Johnny, I think Tom Waits does belong in Middle Earth. Why don't we make him a dwarf? And then, so we came up with this idea of this like toy making dwarf, and that's how they sell toys on their long road to nowhere, you know, a little toy maker. And so, okay, I've got to design a toy making dwarf based on Tom Waits, right? And so I started like putting a beard on Tom Waits and stuff. And I thought, well, if he's like dwarven toys, they'd only be made of wood, but you'd probably wind something up and they'd do something incredible, because dwarves are very clever,
right?
Even with low technology. And so, like, if he's got all these tools and he's finicky and he's all clockworky in the head, which, you know, Del Toro loves. And also he's got to walk through Mirkwood and get tangled and, you know, all that stuff. So I started plaiting his beard and putting it behind him, and everything came up into this top knot like this. They just got everything out of the way, but it was done in an intricate way that worked with like dwarven Celtic weaving and all this kind of stuff. And like, it's great, it's in the movie. And then that sat on a shelf. And then when Peter Jackson took over, and we recast everything, I found out Mark Cadlow was going to be in it, right? Mark Cadlow taught me drama when I was a kid, because New Zealand's that small, and I've always loved Mark Cadlow as an actor. He's the best Herod in any Jesus Christ superstar. And Rick Mayall, who's one of my favorite actors, played Herod, and Mark Cadlow's even better than that. So he's this great actor, right? And so I just took Tom Waits' face out and I put Mark Cadlow's face in, and I resubmitted it as a new design. And it got completely in the film without any changes, right? The thing is, when Peter Jackson showed Mark Cadlow the image that I'd done of Dory, he didn't know the backstory about a toy maker, or he didn't know my idea of that he'd probably get it out of the way if he's traveling through Mirkwood. He just saw a dwarf with a beard that obviously took a couple hours to do each morning. So he thought he must be a very finicky character. So based on the concept design I'd done of his beard, he decided to play Dory like this, who is his idea of a finicky character based on him watching Coronation Street. He based it on a character, Vera Duckworth. A little cup of wine, Gandalf. Oh, I shouldn't be doing that. And so the whole character you see in the movie came out of me designing how a dwarf's beard should be plaited, and the actor taking that as a through line into his performance. You know, and so when you do overthink every little design, more often than not, somewhere down the line, it feeds into an interesting, especially in collaborative forms, it feeds into interesting things you never would have expected. Because when I look at my concept design, I'm imagining, you mug, come here, what you say? All right, let's get him, right? But he saw it as the absolute opposite, more of a feminine sort of thing. And he played it that way. And it's like, okay, well, that works. There's enough burly football playing dwarves in that party. Let's have a prissy one, you know?
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, so I'm always quite pleased when things take on a life of their own. But yeah, so by the time we get this video posted, there will still be time to get into the Kickstarter, and I'm real excited for this one. Johnny was recently on Tested, is it Adam Savage's YouTube show, and had a chance to show off some nice pieces, the Breckencourt. But I guess is it Breckencourt? What's the name of it? The full name?
Oh, Breckencourt Keep. You know,
that's right.
Look, that's just a fun name because things need names when you download them, or something. Like it can become many different structures, however you need it to be. If you've got a place in your campaign, you know, I don't expect people to get caught up on like it having to be, you know, like we're obviously showing kind of a medieval swamp setting, but I'm going to be using this for Dagobah, and my Star Wars campaign is going to be set a lot on Ortolan and Ithoriya, so different planets in the galaxy that are going to require swamp kind of stuff, and also like, you know, you put these hills on grass, and it's Fangorn Forest. It's not a swamp. You can use it. You know, I'll be using it in Middle Earth gaming and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, it's got infinite uses for
So
sure.
do you think we are going to see more parts of the Gloaming that are going to come out?
Absolutely. I mean, it was kind of based on the success of this. Like I said, it was a risk. It would have been very easy for us to do what everyone else is doing and just go for the easy picking, low hanging fruit. Everybody wants a castle. Everybody wants a building, you know, and we're going to be doing more of that stuff, but in a more original, interesting way as best we can. But you know, it's always a tactical risk to go really original when you're selling a product. Like, I always thought it would be the opposite. I've learned so much, like running a business in the last 5 years. Like, as much as I say I make this stuff for myself, which I do, my tastes are, you know, are eclectic because they're formed out of like all of my experiences and interests and nature and nurture and all that kind of stuff, you know.
Right.
For the same reason that, you know, I don't get a lot out of Marvel movies or Avatar, but the bulk of the world does, or something. Like I'm there's a part of me that's switched differently, that or I think Labyrinth is a far superior movie to the whole Hobbit trilogy or something, but one cost way more money and made way more money. Things are triggered differently in my head, you know what I mean? And so like when I pick the ultimate set for me, that's going to appeal to X amount of people. And so it's a testament to Matt Barker, who sees the Gloaming and sees it as a vision he wants to invest in and help bring to the world, rather than playing it safe. And, you know, so we will see more Gloaming because this seems to have found an audience, and like, you know, the comments for both this and the tested video are just, you know, quite overwhelming and really,
it's really amazing. I love the detail that you have in there. It's not like a lot of art that I've seen, but I do like how it is applicable to a lot of different things. I don't have to play it your way to appreciate and utilize the pieces that you've created.
Yeah, it is beautiful. And we really appreciate you coming on with us, Johnny. I wish we could talk a lot more. It is a lot longer. We could actually talk endlessly, but alas, we gotta move on to the next bigger and better thing. And so again, thank you so much, Johnny. The next bigger and better thing, I am 100% sure is going to be in the Gloaming too. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah,
But,
the monster manual we're working on is going, without bias, going to be the best monster manual ever put out there. And it's also like we've found a real cool style too with it, where it really is a celebration of art, as well as just convenient text, you know. Like, I mean, I've got just a stack of White Dwarf magazines that I brought just for the images in it, you know. But You know, like the visuals are so important. But obviously we're meeting in the middle of having really, really useful, accessible gaming stats and aids for both DMs and players. But like the book will completely drop you into the world in the same way like a filmic guide to Middle-earth would, or the Art of Zelda, or a guide to Skull Island, or whatever books. You know, we've already been workshopping it with people that have put together books for films and WETA and stuff like that. So even if you don't play D&D, it'll be basically like the art of Book of the Gloaming as well. You get a lot out of it.
Yeah, it'll be stunning. So I hope you all out there have enjoyed this great opportunity to speak with one of the greatest out there. Johnny Fraser Allen, thank you. Dracoya, as always, you're amazing. And until then, we hope you like, comment, subscribe, and we will catch you all later. Thank you so much.
Thanks.